All right, welcome back, you all. We're going to get off into it again, policy and procedure, also looking at tradition. Once again, we're going to kind of keep that going as we look at um, law, international law, and how certain heads of state, how they view it. And also we had, here in the U.S., we had the king from England to visit the U.S. And his conversation really opened my eyes to something. And I felt like he was speaking a lot within the tactics of the Lee Atwater Southern strategy, like he was using some real good dog whistle terminology. However, it's like my ears picked up on it. Thank you all for coming into the live. But it's like my ears picked up on it, right? And I was like, wow. A number of you may have already known it, but for me, for the first time, I really understood who these people are calling the enemy. It was right there in my face all the time, but for the first time, I'll say I actually caught on to like who they're talking about. And when I say who, I'm focused on the European Union. All these things within the world dynamics that are truly centered around maintaining or upholding European superiority, right? So when you talk about like the European Union, NATO, even going into the United Nations, all of these things, these are apparatus that they've put in place to secure their dominance. So when the king was talking, and, a lot of folks are out here supposedly promoting peace. But when he used the biblical verse, for those of you that heard his speech, but he used the biblical verse where he said, turn your plowshares, into swords and your prong hooks into spears. I'm like, wow, that's not a call for peace. That right there is definitely, a cry for more war, because there's another, verse that speaks, otherwise, using the same plowshare and, your prong hooks, but it does speak to ending and or having no more wars. He didn't use, that verse. But again, what it showed me as he was talking and he's speaking about this European Union and the connection between the connection between Britain or the UK and the United States, I realized their enemy across the board is the Muslims. It's Islam. That's their enemy. That's who they're talking about. That's why they are in that region. Their aim and or their goal is to subdue all the folks of Islam. Now, mind you, I guess some folk look at me and they feel like, I must be Muslim, but I'm not. But I'm aware. And I realized that these European unions or these Europeans, they, just as they focus on Muslims and Islam as an enemy, right here in the US, they focus on me and people that look like me as the enemy. even with the FBI, as they expressed one of the biggest threats to their national security would be to see us organize and unify. That's a threat. So that means we're an enemy, right? But on the global scale, I'm just saying, on the global scale, it became clear to me that when you talk about a United States, when you talk about their proxy within the state of Israel, yeah, their aim or their goal is to conquer and or subdue all the parties associated with Islam. So I understand better now the fight within Islam to not let this happen. And even as you look at, the point of Iran and how, they're positioning themselves when they say things like DEATH to all Americans, or to America, not all Americans, to America. They're speaking about these policies. They're talking about these procedures. They're talking about this tradition. They're talking about the encroachment on their self-determination, on their right to have autonomy. But we have these heads of state, European leaders, with all of their prestige, persuasion, and their money. They've purchased and or they've paid for a lot of interest or partners, such as Saudi and the UAE and, these other supposed Arab states. Paid them off. They're in bed. I'll say they're in bed with the devil. I'll say it that way. Because the U.S. came into that region and they had to have something of a state of Israel so they could have a stronghold, or they could have a foothold, in that region to then continue surveilling and doing what they do. And then they went and bought off some other Arab nations. Now, this is no different than a number of other things. I mean, I'm right here, in the U.S., and you got folks, of my people. I mean, they sell out too. So, I mean, that's just a part of the dynamic, right? But I just wanted to be clear that I understand now when they're talking about this enemy, because it's hard for a lot of us to put a face on a lot of times either what they're talking about or who they are. Who they are as in evil, wicked, unrighteous, the devil, right? And how they want to use their muscle in looking to have control over the entire world. Now, I'll tell you this. If they're successful with their control over the entire world, you all don't expect peace. Don't expect the end to famine. And, all these things are just going to heighten. It's going to be more conflict. It's going to be more famine. I mean, think about it. Under their leadership, you've heard me say, our air is polluted, the water is polluted, the food is polluted, the medicine, nothing is any good. So why you would put your trust, and your faith in them to hopefully turn it around, it just doesn't make sense. So I want to thank you all for coming into the live. And I'll just say, tap the screen. It doesn't cost anything, for you to tap the screen. I'll say share the live, repost the live. Got a good amount of people in the room. Thank you for coming. So let me just go, real quick. I'm going to recap some things that I talked about, last week. Then, we can kind of open the stage up and, hear from a number of you guys what it is that you want to add, to the conversation. But I just want to point out that I'm clear when they are talking about an enemy, they're not talking about nothing but, members of Islam or Muslims. That's what they're talking about. Okay. And they consider themselves to be of a Christian, value or nation, and it's all lies. If they are, of a Christian value or nation, y'all can throw Christianity in the trash because they give it a bad name. They're very corrupt. In your face. They lie all the time. They steal. Okay? They cheat. And if that's what you identify as a Christian nation, then, you could throw all of that in the trash. It's no good. But again, my point though is when a king of England or the UK and a president of the US or of France or Germany, when these individuals are or within their European Union, when they're talking about an enemy, they're talking about the members of Islam. They're talking about Muslims. And they're in that region to subdue, buy off, look to use as much leverage from as many nation states over there to assist them. And a number of them, they've been paid off. You all know who they are. I mean, probably better and or more than what I know. But this is the tension as we're talking about, who's the criminal, right? I'm just going to flat out and say the European Union and, the state of Israel, these are the criminals because they're using like covert tactics, like trying to act like they're coming in the name of peace when all the while they don't mean the people any peace. And I know for a number of you, you want to try to act as if, this sense of democracy and, the women are oppressed and they don't have education. And, these are the talking points. This is the rhetoric. This is a part, of the propaganda. This is how you wag the dog. If you hadn't seen that movie with Robert De Niro, old movie, maybe in the 90s, but I suggest you watch it because a lot of what we're witnessing in this day and time, it's centered around political theater and also a great degree of, these narrative traps. So I want to thank you all for coming into the live. And I say tap the screen. It doesn't cost anything, okay? Show that you support the live. Just tap the screen. Share the live. Repost the live. So look, let me just get off a little bit into policy, procedure, and traditions, because what I've also come to find out is here in the U.S., they don't function off of law. They truly function off of tradition, but it's in the guise, of law. And just like they tricking, folks over in what you call the Middle East, and I use that terminology because it's very new terminology. In fact, Middle East is European terminology. That is so modern. I mean, they developed that terminology, right? But looking at the fact that they don't use law, but they come as if they're coming in the name of law and order. But they're functioning off of their policy, they have procedures, and they have their tradition, and they subject everybody to this tradition, these policies and these procedures. Now, if they were functioning off of law, they'd have respect for what you call international law. If they were functioning off of law, they'd have respect in the U.S. for what they call the Constitution. But they don't have any respect for any of these things. In fact, they found a way to sidestep it. They found a loophole that they can run through to legitimize what they do. Thank you all for coming into the live. So, y'all hang in there with me as I just recap some of the things that I talked about once before. If you've heard it, make notes. If you hadn't heard it, make notes. But one thing for certain, everything that I'm going to point out is centered around evidence-based academic research. I'm not really getting off into what I think and what I feel, but these are things that I've found to substantiate that what you call law, even in the U.S., it's not law. It's beneficial, to their tradition. It's supporting or supportive of their policies in the name of law. But they found a way to circumvent and or suppress actual law. And they use their body politic to do it and make it look legit, as they position it as if people are voting for this. Corruption, the thievery, the dishonesty. It don't make sense. Right? But like I said, no different than how they've sold out, over there in what we call the Middle East for a number of the Arab states or heads of states and countries. They've sold out over here in the U.S. Folks just want money. So these folks, they're just as corrupt. They're no good. So tradition, policy. I want to take you to what Senator Ellison Slotkin said. Ellison Slotkin, she's a former CIA agent. She's also a senator. She was on Bill Murray. And her conversation to Bill Murray, she said, what you thought were law and what you thought were rules, she said, this is nothing but tradition. Bill Murray didn't challenge her. He didn't go into asking, more questions, but it piqued my interest for what she said. What you think is law and rule, she said, it's nothing but tradition. Basically, she was exposing that the U.S. is not functioning off of a standard of law. They've created and or manufactured a manner and or way that they're going to function, that they have total control over. It's more centered around how you deal with privileges. And they're going to use this concept of privileges and governing within privileges to manage and or control anybody and everybody else, and then they pay them off. You buy into it. You benefit from it. And this becomes your de facto or your pseudo law. So, when she said that, what you thought were laws and rules are nothing but tradition, it also exposed that institutions like the U.S. are a mere house of cards. Okay? But the underlying factor to the tradition, and where she say this is not law or rules but tradition, it brought me to the point that when you examine the system of law in the US, you'll find it's based on something called a presumption. Most folks overlook, that concept, but that's fundamental within the structure of the system that they've created for how they govern within within the legal realm. It's all based on something called a presumption. And I tell you, write that down. Thank you all for coming into the live, right? Because when you ask that question, like, who's the criminal, you'd have to see how these folks have set out to manipulate the minds of the masses with things that you're familiar with. And this is what evil does. Evil does what evil do. But this is how they function. So let me read this for you based on a presumption so you can kind of understand. And then I'm going to take you into the Attorney General, because a lot of folk put a lot of emphasis and give a lot of respect to the Attorney General. All these folks are bogus. They're all tied into the corruption. In fact, you can't rock with them, you can't work with them, you can't be a part of what they're doing unless you sign on to upholding their corruption. This is what makes it so crazy about folk thinking 4 more years, you can vote this one out and vote that one in. The voting is not going to change anything because the corruption is embedded within what they're doing. And they're never going to give you the majority seat within their democracy. It's not going to happen. This is where right now today, you have a lot of black folks upset about how they're stripping them of what they call their voting right, which I'm telling you, it's not a right if they can strip it from you. It's a privilege, meaning they gave it to you, so therefore they can take it away. What you mad for? You just got tricked. You just need to realize, and stop playing the game. And this is the system that they've set up. So within the scope of their democracy, they're always going to have the control. They're never going to give up the seat of control, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. At the end of the day, European superiority must rule. That's what they created it for. That's the interest, and within the agenda, that's what they're functioning off of. And you all think you can go into their system and change their system? What the hell wrong with you? Just erect, create, navigate your own. You don't have to overthrow what they're doing, right? Just leave them alone. Turn your attention to another position and or concept of governing. It can be done right here in the good old US of A. But no, y'all rather keep bumping your head and keep trying to fight and take position, from them in their house. I wish you would come into my house and try to take over. When you come into my house, you have to understand what the rules are, and you have to abide by those rules. If you don't like those rules, then you leave. They're the ones who feel that they can go into a people's territory and or a people's place and strong arm and take over. They do corrupt stuff like that. But when you realize for what they've positioned and what they're building is not meant to benefit you, walk away. But a number of you, they pay you so good, you can't walk away. It's like an addiction for a number of you. And you've sold out. and you won't admit it, but you're very charismatic, and you're continuing to try and convince people to hang in there. We're going to make it work. It'll never work. So presumption. Let's get back to the point of the presumption. Thank you all for coming into the live. Let's get back to the point of the presumption, because what they've created within the policy, within their procedures, within their traditions, for what they're positioning as law, or it's legal, which is really different than, what law is. But within their legal system, it's all based off of the presumption. Remember that word, write that word down, study that word. But I'm going to read. A presumption is an inference or assumption of fact accepted as true without direct proof. Pay attention. They're doing things in the idea of a fact without any real proof. So how can it be a fact? But that's how they push it, as if it's real, it's substantive. And they use their prestige and they use, their ability to persuade. And they think from that point, a lie can be a true. It said it says accepted as true without direct proof, often based on probability or law. So what they're doing, it can be based on a law, but it's not founded within the law. It's like they'll make it look like it, sound like it, but it's not. Let's finish with the presumption. It said it plays a crucial role in law by shifting the burden of proof. That part is very key, because what it says is they can make up whatever the hell they want. They can write all these 1,000-page statutes and all this crazy stuff that they do within, Congress or within their what they call their lawmaking assembly, 1,000 pages, but they shift the burden of proof, meaning we're going to assume that this is good. This is above board. But if the people don't then turn around and stop us and or push this down, we're going to run with it as if it's above board. They shift the burden of proof. I hope you can understand the game that's being played right here. No one's told you within these laws that they're putting out, they shift the burden of proof, meaning you have to challenge it. Here's the bad part. A number of you are under the auspice that your representatives, your senators, and even the attorney general, that's what they're there for. They're the ones that's supposed to be checking these things and making sure, that they're above board, where they're not. And I'm going to show you they're not, based on the art of the presumption and what they've signed on to. These people are in position and or place to protect the interest of the government first. So they shift that burden of proof. The people do not have an adequate organization or system in place to vet the law or the thing that they're presenting as a legal measure called a statute. So they shift this burden of proof to the public, to the people. And the people are thinking, oh, well, if Congress let it go, if the Attorney General let it go, then it must be good. It must be right. It's got to be okay. Well, it's not. You got to remember, There are lobbyists in place. People are paid millions of dollars to do nefarious things. And they do it. So they'll get up there and they'll take a concept of a statute that was handed to them from another think tank or some other organization. And you all know this has happened before. And they'll act as if it's something that they've brainstormed or came up with. But these things are then put in position and or place for a particular interest within business that it can then thrive or benefit off of the legal system, allowing them to do a particular thing under the guise of law. But they've shifted this burden of proof, right? He says it plays a crucial role in law by shifting the burden of proof, enhancing procedural efficacy, efficiency, enhancing procedural efficiency, and determining how evidence is viewed, categorized primarily into rebuttable and conclusive types. Basically saying, when they put this out, you need to challenge it. Because just because they put it out don't mean it's above board. Once they put it out, once it gets, to the point of, hey, we're pushing this on to the public needs to have an arm that's right there and ready to push it back. Once you realize it doesn't align with the interest of the people, because you got two concepts of interest. You have an interest of the people, which is actually vacant. No one can tell you, what that is. It hadn't been prescribed, but it's talked about and or it's understood that it's there. And then you have the interest of the government. These are the two interests. And you always have those in government jockeying to tell you they're looking out for the interest of the people. Insane conversation, because you can't handle both interests. One is going to suffer. So, with the burden of proof being shifted, it has to be challenged. So then here we have a legal presumption is a rule of law requiring a court to assume. Listen, y'all, that's all they're doing. Where you think they're dealing with facts, and you all love to talk about a fact this and a fact that, they're functioning off of a presumption, waiting for it to be challenged. A legal presumption is a rule of law requiring a court to assume a fact is true based on established law, logic, or specific initial facts until that assumption is disproven, meaning rebutted by a preponderance of evidence. This is all we're talking about. As the people, we've failed because we've given too much credit. We've put too much trust in their experts and their professionals, and they've sold us out. They've sold you out. They haven't explained to you really what they're doing, but they come and they tell you when they get these, laws from Alex or Heritage Foundation or some other think tank, that, this is going to be good for the people. I mean, it's going to bring jobs and it's going to do this, it's going to do that. The whole time, they're just graping the system, fleecing the people. And the people have not yet established themselves within a system of organization that they can appropriately deal with these things, because they say we're going to beat them to the punch. We're going to beat the people to the punch. We're going to give them a review board. We're going to give them an oversight committee. They're controlling both ends. You can't trust their experts and their professionals to tell you the truth. So they figured out with, again, all of their money, all of their prestige, all of their persuasion, they're trying to manage both ends of it. So they set you up within a review board or an oversight committee. But even there, the heads of, these boards and committees, they already understand the mission. They're being paid to carry out a specific agenda. I know it seems hard to think that they would really go to this extent to manipulate the masses. But these statutes that they're creating, they're based on an assumption until it can be rebutted. Excuse me. Until it can be rebutted. It said these presumptions streamline legal proceedings by shifting the burden of proof to the opposing party. Who you think the opposing party is? These presumptions streamline legal proceedings by shifting the burden of proof to the opposing party. That comes out of the Wex Legal Dictionary. So it's like, who do you think the opposing party is? It's the people. They're running the statutes. They've masterminded the statute. They've handed it to a particular lawmaker representative. They've coached, one of their heads of the review board or oversight committee. And they've made certain everybody understand the agenda. So they all have their talking points. And now how they're going to persuade you that this is a good thing, which makes the point of a rebuttal void, absent, not there. So they get to run, they get to do these things in the name of their tradition. It's not law. In the name of their policy, in the name of their procedure. It's not law. It's legal. And in the guise of what we would call law. But this is what they've set up so that they can thrive. A number of folks refuse to accept that. So now, let's look at this. Talking about their traditions, their policies, their procedures, understanding they've established a system and or way to work. Inside of that system, they are king. They rule. Whatever they say, however they've structured it or based on their interest and their agenda, that's what's going to go down. So they bring people into the scope or the position of their construct. And they do that also based on a presumption. This is what makes it a house of cards. Because the moment we understand the need to point out and rebuttal and line up our substantive evidence against all of the lies, all of the corruption, because the record is there. It's just in need of a functional and or adequate people to organize it and put forth the charge, to state the accusation against the criminals. So they also function off of something called the presumption of continuity. They love that word because with the presumption, they shift the burden of proof. They can presume whatever the hell they want. And if they can persuade folks to never challenge it, then it gets to move as if it's a fact, as if it's real. The presumption of continuity. Listen to this. This is coming out of case law. It says, under the doctrine known as the presumption of continuity, a status, when proved to exist, will be presumed to have continued to exist. I don't think y'all understand the game, the great degree of game that they're running. Because y'all thinking you a citizen this and, you a citizen that and, but there's a difference. As folks have been denationalized while y'all are out here looking at what it means to be naturalized. They've denationalized an entire people. Quiet as kept. Under a doctrine called presumption of continuity. They're going to presume you to be in a status, and they're going to move and or regulate you within that status, within their system. That's what makes it legal, because they've presumed you to be of a lesser status. Oh, they won't tell you that. But when you call yourself a resident of the state, sounds harmless. You've diminished your status. But they put that on you in the statutes that they've written. They say, oh, we presume after 30 days, that you're this resident, of the state. You have no idea you've diminished your power as the people. And then, I'm not going to get off all the way into it, because there are levels to the concept of what a citizen is. Oh, don't wait for their experts and their professionals to tell it to you. But they understand these different levels on the federal side, because on the state side, they got it wrapped up, and you're a resident of the state. You're not a citizen. Or you may say, oh, I'm a citizen of Wyoming. I'm a citizen of Tennessee. I'm a citizen of Florida. No. They say you're a resident. According to the law that's written, the law doesn't say you're a citizen. The law says you're a resident of the state. They presume that after 30 days. Now you have to understand what you're obligated to, what they're subjecting you to at that standpoint, to where it's not about your right. It now becomes about the privileges that they'll give and or take away. Man, this is a high level game that they playing. All in the name of the presumption, or the art of the presumption. So on the Fed side, they use the 14th Amendment. And there's, vernacular jargon within how that thing is structured, to where you don't even realize they're diminishing your position as the people to then put you under their authority and or their jurisdiction within their presumption. It's crazy. They've masterminded. They've educated or miseducated the masses. So here, now let's look at the Attorney General, because we're talking about, and then I'm going to get off into the NSPM 7, National Security Presidential Memorandum, and then I'm going to open the floor up. I don't think I'm going to go through everything that I had. I think I've explained enough at this point, then I'm going to open the floor up. Because we're asking, like, who's the criminal? And I'm telling you, all of these individuals within the concept of a United Nations, within a European Union, within a NATO, these are all criminal factions. These are all people that, or all nation states or governments, you can call it whatever you want, but they're not being honest with the world. They're not being honest with the people. These European nations are plundering the world, people, different nationalities. If they can't buy you off, then they try to crush you, eliminate you. And right now, their biggest adversary is Islam, the Muslims. No, I'm not a Muslim, but I recognize what's happening. Just as they consider me to be an enemy here in the United States, they consider Islam and the Muslims to be just the same enemy. If they can't buy you off, then they demonize you. So let's talk about the Attorney General, because you all think the Attorney General and you're voting and dealing within this government that this is where the power rests. Now I've pointed your attention to the presumption. Now let's look at the Attorney General's office, the office across the board, including the federal office. And let's look at what they say, because you all think they're fighting for you. They're just manipulating and robbing everywhere they go, as much as they can, until they are utterly stopped. So I understand. I understand why they feel like the folks over in Iran are, enemy, because they want it to utterly stop. I want it to utterly stop. So let's look at the Attorney General. And we're talking about the power of the state to assume. Because the Attorney General, he represents, or she represents, the state. So we've already been made aware that the entire legal system is set up off of the art of the presumption. And that just means they've shifted the burden of proof, but they hadn't really told you who the burden of proof is shifted on. But if you have any, degree of sense, it's shifted on to the people. If you call the Attorney General office and you say, hey, I got this, and that here, they'll tell you real quick, can't help you. I don't work for you. I work for the state. So, the power of the state to assume. Let's look at the Attorney General's office across the board. Y'all pay attention. All I'm giving you is evidence-based academic research. Consistent. This is what it says. Consistent with the established policy of this office, talking about the Attorney General. Consistent with the established policy of this office. We have assumed, there that word is again, that means they're not checking nothing. We have assumed that the pertinent statutes are constitutional. Y'all need to stop right there. You're trying to figure out why you have so many issues with a concept of your fundamental rights. and you're depending on a office such as an attorney general thinking they've vetted and or have done some due diligence, you haven't read the statement based on the establishment of their office, the policy of their office. And this is what makes it so funny is they write all this stuff down and they file it, they publish it. It's public record. But because you're tuned to their experts and their professionals, you're constantly being miseducated, lied to. It's like what they say, what's said out in public is never what's said behind closed doors. These are liars. And you trust in a system of liars. You think you can take a corrupt system and make it righteous. It's never going to happen. It has to be either eliminated or a concept of elimination means to remove yourself from it. That's another way to eliminate it, meaning you don't fool with it. It doesn't mean, that you have to have a hand in taking a hammer or something of that sense and trying to knock it down. You eliminate it by removing yourself from under it or from dealing with it, and you establish yourself to then compete against it. But they say, consistent with the policy of this office, we have assumed that the pertinent statutes are constitutional. So again, they're not checking anything. They're assuming that this stuff is right. So under the assumption, they've shifted the burden of proof. So the question is, since they've shifted the burden of proof to assume that it's constitutional, who's actually checking it? You think your legislator, your representative did it? No. They didn't. And this is what's so insane. You have statutes that are out that you consider to be law within the scope of something that's legal, that's only meant to prop up or continue their policy. It fortifies and or support their procedures. This is a part of their tradition. You call it law. They understand exactly what it is. They say, next it says, accordingly. After they say, we have assumed that the pertinent statutes are constitutional, they say, accordingly, you all. We have not inquired into possible constitutional objections. You can't be mad at the Attorney General, because it's on record. They're not checking jack nothing. It ain't their job to check it. Well, whose job is it, you all? It's obviously not your senators or your representatives. And this is where the people fall within the void, because what you think from the standpoint of, oh, they just passed this coming out of Congress and this is the new statute. It's legal, but it's designed to benefit some interest of somebody's business. And because nobody's checking to see whether it's constitutional or not, the true sense of the people, we're injured by these statutes that you walk around and say, oh, but it's the law. Oh, and we need 4 more years to, vote this and vote that. The problem is not within the concept of the voting for this or for that. It's who's checking the law. And don't you sit up and say they're checking it. They just told you off of the presumption they don't check it. They shift the burden of proof. This is where I'm talking to individuals and I'm saying for the U.S., we have to have an established entity committed to checking it. They're not going to give us the resources and or the funds to do it. How asinine would that be? We've actually figured out their corruption, and you think they're going to put resources in our coffers to then stop them from doing what they do? So they say, accordingly, we have not inquired into the possible constitutional objections. Our function has been simply to construe the statutes as written. And you all think what they're doing is above board. These are criminals. They know how to work the pen very well. They have think tanks. They have other organizations on the side that are writing these laws to benefit certain industries that they have, and they push it through. Nobody's checking nothing. That's the game. Oh, I just put you up on game. So now let me get off into the NSPM 7. I'm just going to read a little bit of that, and then I'm going to show you, based on everything that we've talked about as it pertains to the presumption, how it's all BS. How they've just shifted the burden of proof, and they're just waiting for someone to come in and stop it. But who's the someone? Because it's as if the people are asleep. Y'all out here talking about go vote in 4 more years, and Democrat and Republican, they're all complicit. It's as if they don't even understand that this is happening. Or as if they've been paid off. It's one or the other. They're paid off or they're clueless. You can't tell me you have people in those positions and those places that understand the burden of proof has been shifted, but no one has a counterbalance to understand who the burden has been shifted on and how you rebuttal these presumptions. No, ain't nobody talking about this. For a number of you, this your first time hearing a conversation surrounding this. Let's get off into the NSP7 so I can open up the lines, and you all can say what you want to say. So here, the national security, some of you may be familiar with this, but I just want to show you the inconsistency that stood out to me. As we talk about, they don't function off of law, they're functioning off of a tradition. They're dealing with policy. They're dealing with procedure. They write statutes to support their criminality and make you feel as if it's legal, as if it's legitimate, meaning the people back them in their corruption, because that's what legit or legitimacy means. It's saying people agree that it's proper, it's appropriate, and it's just. Nothing that they do is proper, appropriate, or just. So here, National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM 7. Memorandum for Secretary of the State, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Attorney General. So again, this memorandum went to the Attorney General. The Attorney General already told you they ain't checking nothing. They just gonna take it on its face that this is right, this is cool. And they gonna push it like it's all above board. That's the problem. You have all these people in, these top positions, and you're thinking they're doing their due diligence, and they're just figureheads. They're the ones that have been made, to keep these things afloat. They're paid the big bucks to continue swindling the people in the name of the Attorney General's office. Ooh, it sounds so prestigious. The Attorney General the Secretary of Homeland Security. So here's the subject of this memorandum: countering domestic terrorism and organized political violence. That's the point of this memorandum. So now he says, this is what the president say, opening up within the memorandum. He says, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, I hereby direct the following. Okay. First of all, there's nothing within this memorandum that aligns with the Constitution or the laws of the United States of America, because they don't deal with the laws of the United States of America. They deal with statutes that they create. That's what they deal with. Then, when you look at the premise of the memorandum, there's no law within the United States of America that support what they're saying. There's nothing in the Constitution that supports what he's saying. But based on the presumption, you all, they get to act as if all of this is within some due sense of an authority. Look at what he said. By the authority vested in me as president. So right then and there, he's saying, I have a right to lie to you. And if you don't figure it out, then that's on you. By the authority vested in me as president, by the Constitution. So I want you to tell me, where does the Constitution say dissent is criminal? Where in the laws of the United States is mere dissent criminal? Because in the memorandum, that's what they've done. They've turned the sense of a behavior because someone such as myself don't agree with you, that now that's criminal. And he's saying he has the power and or the authority based on the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America. What is he talking about? And nobody is telling the emperor he don't have no damn clothes on? So I want you to see this. And I'm coming to a close and I'll open the stage up. But it says, where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation that will abrogate them. This is already legislated. This is already understood. But because they use the presumption and they shift the burden and no one's challenging it, this is where all the confusion is coming into place, because they're saying, hey, take us to court. They know most folk don't have the means to take them to court. And furthermore, they strategically stripped a number of the law firms that would be willing to engage in such activity. They took funds or threatened to take funds to, make them useless. And this is what you call government. This is what you're praising in America to make America great again. America is not going to be great off of lies, distortion, thievery, corruption. It just doesn't make sense. That's not great. That's a criminal. Also, you have the principle that the state cannot diminish the rights of the people as supported by several Supreme Court cases. But no one's really dealing with the rights of the people, because a lot of you have confused a civil right with a human right, with the unalienable right. You think just because it say right, that it's a right. But there's a difference between a civil right, a human right, and even the unalienable right, which is the chief of the rights. But you don't talk about your unalienable rights. They shifted your attention to civil rights and human rights. I can use human rights to support the unalienable right, but that civil right It ain't no good. The civil right is a privilege that somebody will grant and or take away, such as the what they're out here crying about right now with the voters Rights Act or something along those lines. It's not a right. That's a privilege because they can give it or take it away. When it comes to your unalienable rights, they can't give them, they can't take them away. That's our strong hand, arm, suit, position. But they've educated people to stay away from the unalienable right. Hey, work with us in civil rights and human rights. You'll find your remedy, within one of these two. They're controlling both. Of those, they created that. A human right. A civil right. They create these things, but they can't create unalienable rights. And then they have no rule and or authority over the unalienable right. And this is where people should be trying to function in, and this is what people can use to rebuttal the presumption of their criminal acts, the nature of the laws or statutes, the statutes that they're writing. Don't wait for their experts and professionals to tell you that. But it says, the principle that a state cannot diminish the rights of the people is supported by several Supreme Court cases, including Hurtado versus California and Bodie versus Connecticut. Okay, so let me say this, and I'm coming to a close on the NSPM 7. So now we have an added expectation to identify domestic terrorism and organized political violence. But based on what? Because they want you to identify it based on behavior. Meaning, he doesn't agree with our Make America Great Again. Meaning, he doesn't agree with our Christian values. He's over there talking about Islam and Muslims. So for that reason, you could be considered involved in organized political violence. Simply off of your behavior. This stuff is not founded within the laws of the United States or within the Constitution. They made this crap up. And they use memorandums and statutes to support it based off of presumption, shifting the burden of proof, waiting for somebody to come and dispute it. Nobody's disputing it because you all are waiting for your representative, your senator, or the attorney general to do it, and they're all complicit. So there's a void with respect to how we deal with it. And you think you're going to vote in another 4 more years, just get the orange man out and then we get somebody else in and that's going to take care of it. That's not the problem. I'll say it again. The problem is we don't have the institution in position and or place to check the validity of the statutes that they pass as they shifted the burden to the public. So we now have an added expectation to identify domestic terrorism and organized political violence, the activity by relying on specific indicators, such as behavior or confrontational behavior. So now, any type of confrontational behavior will be considered as an illegal act of dissent. Y'all, this is insane. There's no law, as he said, by the power invested in me based on the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America. There's no law in the United States of America or the Constitution that gives him the power to do this. They're making this crap up under a presumption, shifting the burden of proof. Don't wait for their experts and their professionals to explain it to you. So he says, including but not limited to, picking up from where I left off with what I was reading, as it says, any type of confrontational behavior will be considered as an illegal act of dissent. And this is what they say, including but not limited to anti-Americanism. So right now, I would be considered a DT. I would be considered someone that's involved in organized, organized political violence, just because I don't agree. And he said, by the power invested in him from the Constitution and the laws within the United States, show me where, based on that, you have the power to then say, because somebody disagreed, that that's now criminal. It doesn't exist. Okay, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity. So don't go around talking about their Christian nationalism. I saw a campaign ad where a man was running. He said, don't think you can impose your culture on us. And he was talking about Islam. He was talking about Muslims. And he basically said in his campaign ad that if you didn't comply to what he would be pushing as a law or standard, he basically said he would give authority for them to take your life. This is what the campaign ad openly expressed. This is just how crazy it has gotten and what people are now accepting as government. But this is who these people have always been. They didn't create this establishment and or this government for no multicultural nothing. You can keep believing and or selling that lie if you want to. The best thing you can do or anybody can do is walk away. Leave them alone. Let them do their own work. Leave them to self-destruct by their own devices. And for all the energy and effort that you put in trying to prop them up, establish another venue or system of governance. It can be done. This is the good old US of A. There's nothing that says it can't. In fact, this may be one of the most unique places where it could happen. Oh, but don't wait for their experts and professionals to tell you, because they want you to think manifest destiny was all lawful. That too is based on the presumption. I'll get into that later. But anti-Christianity. So it says support for the overthrow of the United States government. Right? This is why I say we got to be real careful with how we use our words and things that we say. And I'm telling you, you don't have to talk about overthrowing nothing. Just walk away. Leave them alone. Have no interest in what they're doing. Establish your own interest. That would render them powerless. Oh, they'd be begging you to come back then at that point. I mean, they're probably offering you so many millions to billions of dollars that, it would be ridiculous, at that point. It says extremism on migration. These are all the things that they're saying would classify you to be a DT or involved in organized political violence because you don't agree with them on their concept of migration. And this is where the president says he has the power. It's vested in him from the Constitution and the laws of the United States. Show me. Show me where it says you can criminalize somebody because they don't agree with you based on migration. Race, gender, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. That's me. Because I'm telling you, the traditional values and morals centered around their religion and America, it's all based on maintaining European superiority. And that's what they want you to support. If you don't support that, then you're an enemy. And this is where I said it became clear to me that their frustration with Islam and Muslims is the fact that you don't live within the concept of a American tradition, based on the family, the religion, the morality. And for that reason, you're the enemy. Like, for that reason, those of us here in America that look like me, that unfortunately call themselves Black, African American, are considered the enemy. I'll say it again. The FBI have already put it on record. Can't retract this stuff. They've put it on record. The threat to national security would be for people such as myself to organize. Now, you got folks within the concept of the political system, the voting, this, that, and for the Democrat, the Republican. Ain't nobody saying nothing about that. But I put it out there. If you stand for what's lawful, you stand for what's right, denounce the FBI. Denounce the fact that they've said that they consider the organization of people such as myself a threat to national security. Denounce it. But you won't, because you're in bed with these people. I'm not asking for folks to come up on, this platform and do that. I'm talking about those that are in the political positions and or place. You take that question, to your senator, to your commissioner, to your representative, and you ask them if they'll denounce what the FBI said. They won't do it. They'll dance around it, but they won't do it. So, even when you talk about the overthrow of the United States government as being extreme, even as he said, by the power invested in me based on the Constitution, based on the laws of the United States of America, well, in the sphere of what it means to overthrow a government, do you recall the Declaration of Independence, you all? Because in the Declaration of Independence, it articulates a moral, revolutionary right to overthrow or abolish a government that violates fundamental rights. Fundamental rights. Fundamental rights. Maybe y'all don't know what fundamental rights are. Because when you position a memorandum that says you're using a constitution and the laws of the United States to diminish fundamental rights, that's a conflict. And according to a Declaration of Independence, it then said the people now have a right to do something. I'm not encouraging anybody to, move upon that in that manner. What I am saying from a revolutionary standpoint is walk away. Stop supporting their foolishness. Thank you all for coming into the live. Walk away. So, any broad and or ambiguous explanation can be used now to say that someone plans to disrupt the function of a democratic society based on a mere presumption. I can just walk over and say, oh, I think he was getting ready to do that and now he can be arrested. Well, not me, but that's what they can do. Because off of the presumption, they shift the burden of proof. And they've weaponized their legal system in this instance, because they know the majority of people don't have the resources to adequately defend themselves in those scenarios and situations. It's an unfortunate calculated risk that they use against the people. But the people need to wake up. The people need to understand, while you have those that are continuing to sell you the concept of vote, 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 vote for what? More oppression? More European superiority? How about you vote for liberation? How about you vote for self-determination? How about you vote for reclaiming autonomy? You don't want to talk about that. So now, dissent is too vague to be considered constitutional and lawful. So you have these concerns, you have the controversy as it pertains to freedom of speech and some other associations. These would be critics, including members of Congress and civil society organizations that argued the memorandum talking about MSPM 7. It attempts to label dissidents as terrorism and poses risk to First Amendment rights. So they understand that these are the dangers of the memorandum, but none of them have put forward the adequate rebuttal to the memorandum to subdue it. The burden of proof within the memorandum has shifted to the people. They're talking about it, but they're not doing anything. They've explained the concern, but they're not doing anything. So, in the scope of the opposition, so they say in response to the directive, numerous nonprofit organizations have formed alliances to defend against potential government targeting. I don't know where these nonprofits are, but if you have a nonprofit and you are looking to deal with fighting and or exposing these things, then you may be targeted as an organization that's dealing with organized, what did they call it? Organized political violence. So people are being made to make a decision, at this point, right? Are you going to continue upholding, the concept of corruption and supporting, their actions in the name of democracy? Y'all need to stop with the BS, man. This democracy, their concept of democracy, throw it in the trash. Revamp democracy based on true fundamental principles, because they don't deal with fundamental principles. And you keep thinking 4 more years and you're going to get there. It's not going to happen. So I'm going to stop, right there. Oh, I'll close. This is the last one that I'll bring up, because we were talking about the burden of proof, how it shifted, and the fact that you have civil rights groups or members of Congress, they're arguing, that the memorandum poses risk to First Amendment, but I said no one is doing anything, right? So I wanted to point out the true block and the thing that stops them is a constitutional action, not a civil right infraction, not a human right, this or that. It has to be done based on the concept of the unalienable right. That's the superpower. Unbeknownst to a number of people, and they do everything within their measure to keep people away from understanding that. But they've written down the fact that this is the only thing that'll stop them. So here, if a branch, department, or agency of the government engages in unconstitutional activity, not a civil right infraction, not a human right violation, unconstitutional, very specific, very specific. The act of constitutional, unconstitutional, it deals with unalienable right. Engages in unconstitutional activity, it can be taken to court and forced to change its policies or practices, because that's all they deal with, policies and practices, statutes. They create acts. All of this is centered around their tradition. So if you want to stop it, you have to stop it by showing unconstitutional activity, not voting. You have to expose it for having unconstitutional activity. It says it can be taken to court and forced to change its policies or practices. A court will state one way or another whether a given policy, they ain't talking about no law, about a given policy or practice is constitutional or unconstitutional, meaning the fact that they created this thing, that it aligns with the fundamental principle, or whether it violates a fundamental principle, because they told you the statutes are being created. They're not checking it. They're just presuming it's in line with the fundamental principle. And therein lies the problem. And to why I've said we have to have someone that is 24/7 checking these laws or these statutes, once they initiate them, because the burden of proof has then shifted to the public to then come to understand whether it is constitutional or not, because they're not checking it. The Attorney General told you that's not his job. He ain't going to do it. Don't call him and ask him to do it. So I'm going to stop right there. I'll open the floor up. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for coming, into the live. Hopefully, it was something that you could grow on. So at this point, I'm look to see, based on those, I'm gonna start hitting all of the accepts and see who come up. If you're still in the room or not. All right, so that's all the people that were requesting, to come up. Okay, so I've based on all the requests, I've answered all of the requests. So if anybody wanted to come up, this would be the time that you can come up and you can respond to some of what you've heard. You can add to some of what you've heard. I mean, you can even dispute, some of what you heard. Now, I really don't know how you're going to dispute it, because, I mean, I didn't go at it based on what I think or what I feel. I've given you evidence-based academic research. Okay? So, nobody wants to come up. I'm cool with that too. All right. That means, you all, for the most part, were learning, something, or you're taking it all in. And this may just be a new conversation, for a number of you. Right. So I appreciate you for listening. Hopefully you've made notes. Let's see. Okay. All right. All right. Well, that means we've been going for about an hour and a half right now, and I can call it quits. I'm good. I'm good with that. Thank you. I want to appreciate you all for coming, into the live, and just looking at how many people are in the room right now. I'm not certain how many of you may have been around from the beginning, but if you know what I'm talking about, just put a 1 in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. And if it don't make no sense to you, put a 2 in the chat. Okay. If you know what we're talking about, you put a 1. If it don't make any sense to you, put a 2 in the chat. You love Trump dirty draws no matter what he do, what he say. You in bed with the criminals, it just don't matter. As long as you can keep paying your bills and you can keep putting food on your table, you don't care who they hurt, who they harm. You're satisfied. Okay, I appreciate you all. As I say, tap the screen. It don't cost, anything. All right. So I'm going to, end it, at this point. And I thank everybody for coming in, to the live. So who's the criminal? I think we've answered, that question. The European Union, these are your criminals. The United Nations, these are your criminals, right? NATO, these are your criminals, because they're looking to suppress, or oppress the world based on their traditions, their policies, their procedures. They're not dealing, with any law. The concept of law or de facto law would be in the scope of their policies and their procedures, right? So with that, I say thank you all for another Wednesday evening. We'll be back, most high willing, next Wednesday at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And I'm also looking to set up a separate conversation with different people in the region over there in Iran and in Palestine that have boots on the ground that can give insight as far as what's happening outside of what we see on mainstream media. And these are, individuals that are actually living it, and are dealing with it and can tell us some things that are happening that have not made it to the concept of a mainstream media, right? So we're going to do that. And in most cases, because the time difference, I think we're about like 7 hours, or behind, them. So I'll have to do it at like 1 or between 1 and 3 Eastern Standard Time, in order for it to be somewhere around 8, 9, 10 for them, their time, which would be late in the evening, right? So I want to thank you all for coming into the live. Thank you for all the taps, thank you for the gifting. Thank you for sharing the live. Thank you for reposting the live. All right. But with that, I'm up out of here. Appreciate you all until the next time. All right. Have a good one. Y'all be safe. Good evening, good morning, good night, wherever you are.